Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a number of requests. The first is I'm going to second your request for an additional budget meeting or workshop. I agree, this year, a big change was made to how budgets were done. We used to get a lot of categorical funds that provided specific services. We're expected to continue to provide those services, but those funds no longer exist as separate categories. So we need to really look at this budget in detail and make sure we're providing all of those required services now that the funds aren't separated out. So I'm going to second that request. My second request has to do with curriculum. So I'm going to direct this to Mr. Andrew. I have gotten many emails from concerned parents and community members. Some of them have been related to the PragerU Kids supplemental materials that were approved for use by the state. Those will not come before the board. I want to let the public know that. They are not core curriculum, so we don't adopt them like we did adopt our social studies curriculum earlier this summer. And they're also free supplemental materials. If they were something the district had to purchase, they would come before us because they would be a purchased item. We do have other supplemental materials that we have purchased. My understanding is that these materials were approved by the state. That means that we're allowed to use them, not that we're required to use them. They were also approved very late in the game. So my understanding is our curriculum team already has the curriculum maps for next year. We have a number of supplemental materials that the curriculum team has vetted, many of which were purchased with the approval of this board. The PragerU Kids materials are not among those. And my request is that the curriculum team put together a statement explaining how and whether these materials will be used. My personal opinion, I haven't reviewed all of the videos, but I've reviewed a great number of them. And compared to some of the supplemental materials that we have vetted, these do not seem to hold the same educational value. In fact, they seem to be filled with inaccuracies. So I would suggest this is not a board decision, but I think it's very important that our superintendent and his staff put out a statement so that the public knows whether and how these will be used, and also so that they know the procedures for opting their children out of them as required in the Parents' Bill of Rights. Now, the revised social studies standards, those are state standards, but as a board member, I do not condone these changed state standards. I, again, don't have control of them, so I'm just making a statement to the public. Slavery was wrong. There are no two sides to slavery. There was no benefit to slavery. The violence perpetrated against Black communities during the Jim Crow era and during the Civil Rights Movement were not violent people on both sides. This was violence perpetrated by white supremacists against Black communities. The destruction of the Rosewood community in Levy County was not bad people on both sides. And to say that is false, it is dishonest. And I do want to remind teachers that your professional code of conduct requires you to be honest. Now, I want to thank all of our community members who came out to express their opinions, and I want to talk about the big elephant in the room tonight, which is the legislation surrounding LGBTQ students and what our district is doing about that. First, I want to say that I was unaware of the training that was taking place Monday until you all became aware of it and a community member contacted me about it. So that was, someone came up and said, did the board direct this? No, the board did not direct this. Up until to this point, our LGBTQ guidance has consisted of an internal procedural document that's been developed by Dr. Edwards and her team in conjunction with our Inclusive Schools committee from the community. Many of you are here tonight. And we've had 2 iterations of that in response to changing legislation. My opinion is that I am requesting that we have a 3rd iteration of that because We do not need training that is hearsay from one meeting with administrators that they then pass down to department heads, that they then pass down to teachers, that they then tell the paraprofessionals. We need guidance. People need clarity. Lack of clarity causes fear, and fear will paralyze this district. It will lead to people resigning. It's not a good thing. And as that procedural document is developed, that's not something that comes before the board. We do policies, not procedures. But as that guideline is developed, I want to remind our staff that the Parents' Bill of Rights does apply to all parents. It does not apply to some parents. The parents of trans and non-binary students have just as much right to direct their child's education as every other parent. And we need to honor those rights by not instructing our teachers to violate them. And I do want to say that if this does not happen in internal procedure, I will ask that it happen as an action item and become policy, because this is the hill I am willing to die on. Many of you might know that before I was elected to this board, I worked hard with Dr. Howler, who was here tonight, to help advocate for mask mandates. And I did that in part because my daughter is disabled. She has multiple medical disabilities, and for her, getting COVID could be deadly, or it could be permanently debilitating. Her pre-K ESE teacher was in the audience and had to leave early and didn't get a chance to speak, and I'm sorry that she had to leave, but I fought for my daughter's life, and I fought for the lives of other children like her and many other children. We still don't know why some people get severely ill, become permanently disabled, or die, and others don't. But before vaccines were available, I fought to keep mask mandates in this county, even though it was against state guidance, because children's lives were at risk. My child's life was at risk. And I know there was a speaker who said we need to focus on instruction first. Children who are not safe cannot learn. We have a hierarchy of basic needs. Children who do not feel safe cannot learn. Protecting our children's safety comes first. And with COVID, it was very obvious, especially before vaccines, that we were dealing with a life or death situation. But this is a life or death situation too. Children will die if their gender identity is not affirmed. They will die. They will die from suicide. They will be beat up, bullied, possibly even murdered. Because when we set an environment that is non-affirming, we complicitly say it is okay to other dehumanize and harm trans individuals. And I'm putting myself on the line tonight, and I don't have to. This doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect my family. But I am Jewish, and one of our callers brought up the Holocaust, and another speaker discussed genocide. This is a genocide against trans people, make no mistake, it is. And I'm going to quote Elie Wiesel. I am Jewish. I have family members who died in the Holocaust, and what Elie Wiesel says, and I quote, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere." And this is one of those times. I'm not going to sit neutrally. And so I am telling staff, typically we have dealt with this as a procedure in the past because we could respond nimbly to changes in the law, and you all know, because some of you are involved, that these laws are being challenged in courts. And sometimes one court says, oh, stop that law, you can't implement it, and then the next court says, oh no, go ahead, implement it. Making policy is time consuming. You've seen some of the things that came before us tonight have come to 3 different meetings. So being able to respond to those changes is hard with policy, but if our staff is not brave enough to handle this in procedure, then I will bring it before this board, because that is how important it is. We are talking about the lives and safety of our children. So I'm begging our superintendent and his staff to make sure that we take the most affirming possible interpretation that we can of this law. Thank you.